What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 30 of the PlayStation Drive, a very special episode 30. I'm one of your hosts, the man on the moose, Ryan Turford. I'm joined, as always, by the man himself, Matt Sawinski. Matt, how are you doing today? Even though this is an odd question to ask because we literally, this is just us just time warping 2 weeks into the future. We're wearing the same clothes we wore 2 weeks ago, Matt. But how are you?
I'm good. I predict nothing but good things over the next 2 weeks. I mean, these past 2 weeks were awesome. There was a lot going on. As of this episode airs, I am actually in Mexico getting married and stuff, which is why we are having a bit of a time warp, which I really appreciate you, Ryan, accounting for that. But I'm ready to talk about some fun stuff, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well. That's actually really exciting. I can't believe you're actually getting married this week, Matt, the week that this is recording. So huge congratulations, of course, to Matt for getting married. It actually happened. It's official.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's get into the show proper because we have, as I alluded to, we have a very special episode because this is actually a non-traditional episode because since we're recording this in a couple weeks in advance, the Game Awards are actually happening this week. In case you didn't know, I mean, Matt, I don't know if you knew this, but the Game Awards are happening this week. And we thought we would take the opportunity to kind of go through all the nominees for the Game Awards and kind of give like our picks for who we think will win each award, but also who we want to win. So we're going to go through this kind of like Oscar prediction style. We're going to go through most of the categories. Obviously, there are some categories we're not going to talk about, like best esports categories, because neither Matt or I watch esports, so we really have nothing to say about that. And we're also going to kind of skip the Content Creator of the Year award because there's no one here we're really pulling for. Like, I don't think either of us really know any of these people. I think they're all Twitch streamers, and I've never heard of any of them. So there you go. All right, our first category is Innovation in Accessibility, presented by Chevrolet, of all things. I think it's very silly for an accessibility award, but whatever. So here are the nominees: Far Cry 6, Forza Horizon 5, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and The Veil, Shadow of the Crown. Now, The Veil, I've never played that game, so I really don't have anything to say about that. But as far as the rest of these, I've played all of these games. I would say for this one, my pick for what will win is probably Forza Horizon 5, because I think there's a lot of accessible options in that game, a lot of things you can tweak, and the way it works with the adaptive controller, I think, really plays into that a little bit, especially because that is a Microsoft first-party game. So I would say that's probably the one that I think will win, and honestly, it's probably the one that should win. I mean, to be honest, I think that all these games actually did a good job with accessibility, but I'm also not the type of person that maybe should be answering this either, because I usually don't have to use a lot of these options. So, Matt, I'm curious to know what you think about this one.
So yeah, I've played Forza, Guardians, and Ratchet, and from what I understand, all three of them were quite celebrated with their level of accessibility. I've watched some of the accessibility reviews for them, and I know people were very, very happy with all three of them. I think Forza is probably going to take it. I think you're 100% right, but I think all of these should be celebrated in the effort that they take to kind of, like you said, we are, very privileged in our kind of positioning, and we don't have to use a lot of these features, but I'm so glad that gaming is starting to kind of add more and more of them in. So I think Forza should and will take it, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ratchet or Guardians also takes it, just because of how, how many people were so happy with how each of them handled it. So this one for me is kind of like, I think they all deserve a win, and whichever one wins, I'm happy with it. But I think you're right. I think Forza's going to take it. Yeah,
this is one of those categories where it's like, regardless of who wins, I think we all win with this one, because
said.
When everyone can play together, everyone wins. So that's a motto. It's ripped straight from Xbox, of course. So next up, most anticipated title presented by Prime Gaming. We've got Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, the sequel to The Legend of Zelda, The Breath of the Wild, and Starfield. And yes, we don't actually know what Breath of the Wild 2 is called, so that's why they have to call it that. So out of this list, I think this is actually a pretty big list of games. It's kind of hard to just pick just one at this point. To be honest, for me personally, I think that I'm actually most anticipated for Horizon of this list, because I really love Horizon Zero Dawn. So that's the one that I want to win. But what I think is going to win is just, actually, I have to look no further than the Golden Joysticks, which actually just happened the same week that we're actually recording this episode, because the Golden Joysticks, for folks that don't know, is actually an award show that's entirely fan voted. And the winner of most anticipated game at that award show, with pretty much the same nominees, was Elden Ring by like a landslide, they said. So I actually think Elden Ring's probably going to take this one, because this one, even though it's not fully fan voted, I think this one's weighted more towards the fans than some of the other awards. So I think that's actually probably what's going to win. But what do you think, Matt?
I love this category just because like I feel like it's such an interesting like psychological buildup between of like imminence, like how close are we to this game versus how much have we seen versus how much is unknown, which like all of that plays into hype in a different way. Like for Breath of the Wild, the sequel to Breath of the Wild and Starfield, we know next to nothing about either one of them.
We don't even know what that sequel to Breath of the Wild is even called. We're just calling it the sequel to the Breath of the Wild.
So I feel like if people like getting into that unknownness, they're going to go vote for one of those two. Personally, I'm most excited about God of War Ragnarok, and I think that one also has a fair shot at winning. But I mean, like you said, if the golden joysticks are any indication, Elden Ring has so much hype behind it, and like we've just had a preview cycle around it. It's going to be coming out in just a few months. So I think you're right. I think Elden Ring is going to take it. Personally, I want God of War Ragnarok, but I love this just because it's such an interesting buildup of so many different things that like, yeah, I'm excited for pretty much all of these. So I'm curious to see what's going to take it. But I think you're right. I think Elden Ring's going to take it. Personal God of War.
Yeah, for sure. Next up, best multiplayer. We've got Back 4 Blood, It Takes Two, Knockout City, Monster Hunter Rise, New World, and Valheim. So this is a category that I've only played a couple games in. I've played Back 4 Blood, Knockout City, and Monster Hunter Rise. And It Takes Two. I did play that as well, but I haven't played New World or Valheim. Of this category, I want Knockout City to win because I actually think that people kind of underestimated just forgot how much fun Knockout City was. Like I remember like having long nights playing with Mr. Badbit and Sean Capri and just having a super fun time with that game. I think that game was really fantastic, had a really great suite of multiplayer options available to it. So I actually want Knockout City to win. But I don't think it's going to win. I actually think it's probably a toss-up in this category between It Takes Two and New World. I think is probably the two that are going to take it. Because It Takes Two, I think, is like a really fantastic use of like online co-op at its best, or even local co-op at its best. And New World, I think, is just an MMO that a lot of people are just really behind right now, even though I personally, as an MMO fan, I'm not really super into that game for a bunch of reasons that I'm not going to get into here. But of the two, I think it's a toss-up, but it'll probably be It Takes Two because it might be one of the only categories that I'm predicting it maybe wins. But what do you think, Matt?
I think you're right. I think It Takes Two is going to take it. I think the dark horse in this one could be Valheim just because of how much hype that game had earlier this year and how many people really, really loved it. I think New World could take it. Monster Hunter Rise, I think, is just kind of, it's been out for a little while. I feel like the hype is now dying. Yeah, and like Back 4 Blood, people like the multiplayer community seems to be kind of back and forth around it. So I don't know if it's going to really kind of stand out here. But I think Knockout City deserves something here because, like you said, it is a lot of fun for a multiplayer game to come out with next to no server issues, with a bunch of cool content, with regular updates. I think it was a really, really nice surprise this year. But I think it's probably going to be It Takes Two just because of how incredible the gameplay really is in that game and how well it works as a co-op game. Like start to finish, the game continues to switch things up. It doesn't overstay its welcome. Like I said, the only thing that really bothers me with It Takes Two is its horrible, horrible story. Yeah. But gameplay wise, it's incredible. So I think It Takes Two is going to take it, and it's probably my personal choice as well, just because of how much fun it was. But I think Valheim has a chance to kind of come up here as well. Yeah,
I think actually like it's probably like a lot closer of a category than I'm probably kind of letting on, because I do think a lot of these games really, really stand up. Again, Back 4 Blood is also really fun. So who knows? But next up, best sim/strategy game. We've got Age of Empires 4, Evil Genius 2, World Domination, Humankind, Inscription, and Microsoft Flight Simulator. Of these, I have only played Microsoft Flight Simulator, so I really only have, not much to say. And Flight Simulator actually came out last year and won this category last year. So this year, I mean, it'll probably actually end up winning of these. It'll be either that or Age of Empires 4, I think. But I don't know. I really don't have a dog in this race. And Matt, I don't think you've played any of these games either, right?
I haven't. I think you're right. Flight Simulator will probably take it. I think the other one that might be worth giving a shout out is Inscription. I'm seeing a lot of really positive buzz around it online the last little while since it came out. A lot of people are really, really stoked on it. I just don't know if enough people would have played it to have it like really be considered a serious thing. But I think you're right. I think Microsoft Flight Simulator probably has this in the bag.
Yeah, for sure. All right, next up, best sports/racing game. And this category surprised me a little bit because There's some nominees that I would have loved to see on this list, but didn't make it. But we've got F1 2021, FIFA 22, Forza Horizon 5, Hot Wheels Unleashed, and Riders Republic. So interesting list of games. I've actually played all of these except for F1 2021 because I don't really care about F1, unfortunately. FIFA actually kind of surprises me because like I don't even think this year's FIFA game was like super strong or anything like that. Like I maybe would have loved to see a game like Knockout City maybe make this category, or something like Cruise and Blast on Nintendo Switch. Like I'm actually kind of surprised that's not here either. But otherwise, I think, pretty solid list of games. I mean, but we already know what's going to win this one. It's kind of a no-brainer. It's Forza Horizon 5. It's what's going to win. I mean, it's the one that I think should win, and it's the one that's going to win. And Matt, I'm assuming you probably agree with me, right?
Yeah, I think Forza is going to take it, especially because it's been left off of, Game of the Year. I think this is going to be a pretty easy spot for it to kind of slide in and win something that it absolutely deserves. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's going to be Forza, and I think it deserves it.
Slam dunk, I would say. There's that's my lock of the week. You can pretty much just lock that in for your Game Awards betting going on. Please don't bet on the Game Awards. All right, next up, Best Family Game. We've got It Takes Two, Mario Party Superstars, New Pokemon Snap, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, and WarioWare Get It Together. I've actually played all of these games, surprisingly, because they're almost all of them are actually Nintendo Switch, like Nintendo first-party games. And of these, I would actually probably have to give it to Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. I actually think that, especially with the Bowser's Fury kind of add-on and how many inventive ideas they had with that, like, I actually think that that's like a really strong contender for this category. That's what I think should win. And what I think will win, it's a toss-up probably between that and It Takes Two. I think those are probably the two front-runners for this category. But Matt, what do you think?
I think you're probably right. It Takes Two, I think It Takes Two is really gearing up to have a pretty successful Game Awards, given how many people really, really care about that game. Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, I think is also fantastic. Super Mario 3D World is actually one of my favorite Mario games. My fiance and I played it like to death. We almost 100%ed that game, and Bowser's Fury was really fun. The only thing that makes me a little bit anxious about that is that because it is a port and Bowser's Fury wasn't massive, like it was a nice add-on, but it also came out so much earlier in the year that I'm a little worried that people may have forgotten about it, kind of thing. I think New Pokemon Snap actually also stands a chance in this category just because of, it's a return to a game that a lot of people care about. It's been a long time coming, and the game was actually really solid and really fun. So I think New Pokemon Snap also stands a chance, but I do think it's going to be It Takes Two, and I think it also deserves it.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. Next up, Best Fighting Game. I know Matt's ready for this category because I know Matt plays a lot of fighting games, just so many. We got Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, the Hinokami Chronicles, Guilty Gear Strive, Melty Blood Type Lumina, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, and Virtual Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown. Matt, I can probably just fill in for you on this one because I know you probably haven't played any of the fighting games, because I've played all of these games except for Demon Slayer, which I just picked up the week of this show, the week of this recording, and I'll have actually played it by the time you're actually listening to this, but I don't really have any input to say on this episode. But I mean, this one's also just like the sports/racing category. It's a slam dunk. It's Guilty Gear Strive. It's the one that should win. It's the one that will win. I don't unless the jury for some reason votes Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl for some reason over it, because I think it might have been the other one that might have been most. God. It's the one that I think would have been the most played by some of the jurors if you look at some of the jurors, because Guilty Gear is, admittedly, even though it's amazing, it's a bit of a niche title. But I actually think it's Guilty Gear is still kind of in my top 5 games of this year, period, let alone fighting games. I think that game is amazing. So I definitely think it's not even just my personal bias here. I definitely think it's the highest quality game that's here. I think it's easily the one that wins. But shout out to Melty Blood Type Lumina as well, because I think that game is also awesome. But it's just a shame that it came out the same year as Guilty Gear, because otherwise I think it would have been maybe the winner in it, maybe a different year this year. But Guilty Gear by far is the clear choice for me personally. I think that one's a shoo-in to win this, barring again the jury voting incorrectly for Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, I think. So there you go.
I think you're spot on.
Yeah. Next up, Best Role-Playing Game. We got Cyberpunk 2077, Monster Hunter Rise, Scarlet Nexus, Shin Megami Tensei 5, and Tales of Arise. Matt, before I go into my diatribe about this award, go ahead and tell me what you think about this one.
I think this is honestly going to be a toss-up between Shin Megami Tensei and Tales of Arise. The only thing that I think Tales will win. I also think it deserves it. I haven't played enough of Shin Megami Tensei 5. I spent 10 to 15 hours with it so far, but it's a big JRPG. It's nowhere near enough. The only thing that makes me nervous about SMT 5 is just because I don't think enough people may have played it or finished it by the time that the voting was going on to really give it a fair chance. But I think it deserves to be up there. Monster Hunter Rise seemed to kind of come and go. There was so much hype for that game, and then it seemed to kind of die out immediately after it came out. So I don't think it's going to take it. Scarlet Nexus was also a lot of fun, but again, and I mean Cyberpunk's there. I think Tales should win and probably will win. I think it stands a good chance. What about you, Ryan? Where are you at on this?
If anything taught us anything, Matt, from our 2.5 hours of talking about Tales of Rise, I like that game a lot. So it's definitely the game I want to win on this list. It's the game that I personally enjoyed the most. Even again, I'm also not super far in Shin Megami Tensei at this point, but I'm actually really enjoying that game as well. But I'm not enjoying it as much as I enjoyed Tales of Arise. Tales of Arise was a game that I fell in love with, and it's not just me being a Tales fan. I think that's a game that's good enough to bring in Sean Capri, who doesn't like the Tales series. So
yep.
I think that this is if there's any year where a Tales game could win this award, it'll be this year, and I think Tales deserves it. However, I have a thought in the back of my head that thinks that Cyberpunk actually might win this one, and I don't want it to win because that's not my choice for this award. But I actually think there's a possibility that Cyberpunk actually pulls out the win on this one. But please, I'm gonna just not chance fate. I'm gonna say that Tales is also gonna win this award. But man, it's a toss up. This year in particular, as someone who follows RPGs pretty regularly, as on the RPG Cave, as someone who plays a lot of RPGs, this year in particular, there were so many amazing RPGs this year, Matt, between the ones we've got here, but then also Bravely Default 2, Neo, The World Ends With You, Monster Hunter Stories 2. There were so many amazing choices for this award. So, I think that, even out of these top 5 contenders, any one of them I think could win. But yeah, I'm gonna stick with Tales of Arise. I think that'll be the one that wins it for sure.
Real quick, Ryan, do we quit video games if Cyberpunk takes best role playing and Nickelodeon takes best fighting back to back? Because I feel I don't know if we're going to be able to climb out of that hole.
I would be very, very, very sad if that happened, but I don't necessarily think it would be such a bad thing, especially if Cyberpunk wins, because I actually see a lot of merit in Cyberpunk winning. Yes, I don't think the console version is in prime shape, but I said this last year when I played Cyberpunk for the first time on PlayStation 4 Pro, that if this game ran correctly, or if you play it on PC, I think this is a Game of the Year contender as far as the gameplay, as far as the story is concerned. So if you look at it from that lens, I actually think that's why I think there's a possibility that it actually wins, because again, I think the game itself, if all the elements are kind of aligned together and it plays well, I think that's a Game of the Year caliber game. It just depends on if you can overlook that as an opinion.
I largely agree with you. I think the game is also fantastic, and I played it start to finish, even on console, as it was a broken mess. I just think that I think that the general thing around it should be considered as well, given how we still don't have next gen stuff. It still isn't running well on console. That I feel for me, all of that, regardless of the game's quality when it works, I feel all of that should be considered. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's why I almost feel a designation should have been made that it's the PC version that's in the running and not the overall version. Because if you look at it from that point, then I actually think it's a really strong contender for that award. So
I think that might be fair.
Yeah, but we'll see. It just kind of depends on how they look at it. But let's move on. Also, just to go back to your point about Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl, yes, I'll be very sad if that wins, because don't get me wrong, that game's fun, but it is definitely not the best fighting game this year by a long shot. Nope. All right, best action adventure, we've got Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Metroid Dread, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Resident Evil Village. This is actually very similar to the Game of the Year award, and I've actually played all 5 of these games now that I've played Guardians of the Galaxy. And this is actually a really close one too. But I will say my personal pick is actually Metroid Dread. I think that game is still easily one of the best games I've played in the last 10 years. From everything that this award kind of has in its description, where it's excellence in both action exploration and puzzle design. And I think that that's something that Metroid Dread absolutely nails if you go by just the description of what this category is really looking for. And I would definitely say like Guardians of the Galaxy and Psychonauts 2 would kind of be like kind of my 1A and 1B for this award, but definitely Metroid Dread is the one that I want to win. And who I think I'll win though, it's actually probably not going to be Metroid Dread. I actually think that it'll probably be Psychonauts 2 for this award. I think that's what's going to win. I think I don't think it's going to get the recognition for some of the later awards, and I think that's how it's going to get voted on for this award. I think this is the award that maybe Psychonauts 2 wins. But Matt, what do you think?
See, I think you're largely right. Guardians of the Galaxy would be my personal pick for the one that I would want to see for win, just because I think it's also one of my biggest surprises of the year. I think the rest of these, everybody kind of knew that they were going to be at least good, right? Mm-hmm. Guardians, I feel like really had like a large hill to climb. And ultimately when we got there, I think it was really, really good with a really, really heartfelt story with fun combat that doesn't always hit the mark, but I feel like it's my personal pick for the game that I would want to win. For who's going to win, I think Psychonauts 2 is probably likely. I think, given how celebrated that game was, how, long people have been waiting for it. But I would not be surprised to see Dread or Ratchet also win. I think it's really a toss-up between those three. I think the votes are going to be split amongst those three, with Psychonauts ultimately being the one that kind of comes out on top. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't be surprised if Dread or Ratchet take it.
Yeah, and I actually think with Guardians, I think the thing that holds it back, number one is the combat, but number two, I think the pacing of the game hurts it a little bit towards the end of the game. I think that that's criticism I saw a lot from critics was just it felt like it was really strong at the beginning of the game and then it kind of dips a little bit as far as the pacing is concerned, as far as the gameplay pacing, not so much the story pacing, because I think the story is great throughout the entire game, but I think the gameplay, it does dip a little bit in that game, which is I think what holds it back from winning, even though I do think the surprise factor plays into it a little bit, but yeah, I think we both agree probably Psychonauts 2 is probably what's going to win. Yep. Next up, best action game, Back 4 Blood, Chivalry 2, Deathloop, Far Cry 6, and Returnal. For this category, I've played everything but Chivalry 2, and I gotta say, it's definitely Returnal. It's definitely my pick for this one. I especially with the way the description kind of goes for it, where it excels in action gameplay. Like that's kind of the first thing you should be considering for this award. And there's one game in particular out of this list that really like shined as a pure gameplay experience to me, and that was Returnal. I think that's a game that I think really deserves this award. It's the one that I think is going to win and the one that I'm pulling for. So out of this list, yes, 100% it's Returnal, I think is what's going to win it. But what do you think, Matt?
Returnal is my personal pick as well. I just think it's just so fun, and once it kind of hooks you and grabs you, it doesn't really let go. The one thing that I'm a little bit worried about is how many people may have dropped off it, given its kind of early issues, and alongside the fact that like there was no save states at all. So I think that might be one thing that might hold it back. While I do think it deserves it, I actually do see a strong possibility that Deathloop might take it as well. For me, I think it's a toss-up between Deathloop and Returnal. I want Returnal to win, and I think it will win, but I think there's a chance that Deathloop might kind of come in here and take it as well. Yeah,
it's always a possibility, but I look at it as well where like Returnal, for the most part, it's not up for any of the bigger awards, I don't think. So I think if it's going to win, it's going to win here. And again, if you just look at the descriptor, like if you're going to evaluate it that way, how it's kind of intended, that's how I would kind of vote in that perspective. So I hope it wins, because I would love to see it get some kind of recognition. And I think it was a great gameplay experience. I just wish that, there were other elements of the game that were a little bit better, and that was kind of my critique about it when it first came out. But overall, I think it's a great choice. The next two categories we might skip over, but Matt, do you have anything to say about best VR or best mobile game? Because we're not going to probably read them off or anything like that, because I haven't really played any of these games.
For best mobile, I think it will be, and I think Fantasia deserves it. I know there's a lot of people who really, really love that game. And for best VR versus AR, I think it's going to be Hitman 3, just because I love how much they put into it, especially making levels from Hitman 1 and 2 backwards compatible with VR. But that's all I'll say for that.
Yeah, with VR as well, I also think, because Resident Evil 4 VR is also in there, and I've heard a lot of people really happy with that port of Resident Evil 4, so I actually think that is the only other one besides Hitman 3 that'll probably win that category. Whereas mobile, it's probably Fantasia, but again, it's mobile. I don't really care too much about it. Next up, best community support. We got Apex Legends, Destiny 2, Final Fantasy 14, Fortnite and No Man's Sky. I'm only reading this award to you, Matt, because there's only one clear pick from this category that I want to win, and I think will win. And that game is Final Fantasy 14, because I mean, it absolutely deserves it. It has one of the best communities in any game I've ever seen, like one of the most positive, uplifting communities out there. And I gotta say, the support that you get from the developers for that game is top notch. So as a huge Final Fantasy 14 fan, I definitely think it's up there. It's also out of this list of games, especially with something like Destiny 2, for example, where Destiny 2 had some backlash as far as the community this year, and its own set of issues. And same with Fortnite, where it's kind of all over the place. No Man's Sky is definitely, I think, has a positive community, and so does Apex Legends, but I just don't think it rivals the community that's the support that you get from both the community itself, but also the developers in Final Fantasy 14. So that's the one that's definitely my pick. But what do you have to say? Do you probably agree, Matt?
I do agree with you. I think Apex, actually, the last few months, people have been really, really salty about it. There's been some decisions made along the way that have really upset their community. And I know there's been a lot of back and forth with the devs about how it's being handled. So I think Final Fantasy 14 deserves it, will win it. And I do want to shout out No Man's Sky as well, because that community has grown into quite a large and positive community as well, given how, that the very, very storied experience with that game. So I do want to shout them out as well, but I do think Final Fantasy 14 deserves it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, my other reasoning as well, it also won at the Golden Joysticks as well, the same category over there. And also, it was amazing seeing Yoshi P accept that award. I love that man to death. So it was great. All right, next up, and this one, I haven't played nearly as many games in it, unfortunately, but maybe you might have, Matt. Games for Impact. We've got Before Your Eyes, Boyfriend Dungeon, Chicory, Life is Strange, True Colors, and No Longer Home. Out of this category, I've only played Chicory and Life is Strange, True Colors. And of these two, it's probably Life is Strange, True Colors, because they first of all, the game itself is mostly about, mental health. It's about, examining people's states of mind and kind of like helping them through whatever problem they're dealing with. Or you can twist that problem in horrible ways as well if you're kind of evil in a lot of ways. But I do think it goes a lot of places and talks about subject matter that I wasn't expecting the game to talk about in such an open and honest way, that I really think that it's a positive game as far as mental health is concerned. So I actually think that that's a game that I could see win this award. I think Chicory is a great choice too. But Matt, beyond these games, like did you have a chance to play any of these? Because I know you play a lot of the smaller indie stuff over at Burnout Brighter.
Yeah, so I actually played. I played some of Boyfriend Dungeon, and I played all of Before Your Eyes. My personal pick for this is Before Your Eyes, just because of how interesting that game is. Like, it actually, you need a webcam on. You don't have to have it on, but that's like the preferred way. You have a webcam on, and it actually tracks your eyes. And at certain moments, when you blink, the game skips forward in time. And like, it actually has a really deeply profound story that made me cry more than a few times. And let me tell you, trying to play a game where you have to, you're partially controlled by your eyes and you're crying, make things a little bit difficult. The only worry that I have about this one is just, I don't know if enough people played it. I do think it 100% deserves it. And it's my personal pick just because of how interesting it set itself up, how well the story's handled, the way that you kind of function and move through the game with your eyes being the central focus, and skipping through time just because you can't, there was times where I was literally just trying to keep my eyes open long enough to keep experiencing the scene because I wanted to see what was happening. I think it was an absolutely brilliant game. I think Chicory is really strong as well. I just think for me, the pacing of Chicory, it just goes on a little bit too long, while I think the message in it is still very profound. What I think will win is Life is Strange. I think that's just kind of like the kind of big one on this list that I know a lot of people really cared about. But I want Before Your Eyes to win.
That game actually sounds really interesting. I think you've sold me on it. I definitely want to check that out because I hadn't even heard of it before looking this up. So I definitely need to look more into that game because I would love to kind of go through that experience because it sounds great. So I'm really curious. But this is another one like the accessibility list too, where like regardless of who wins, I think we all win in a lot of ways because I love games kind of exploring this space and not being afraid to try certain things and also trying to affect, change in a positive way. So, and I think like the games even going on an overview, I think we could say that for pretty much all 5 of these. So even if we haven't played them all. So Next up, best debut indie, and I'm sure you'll probably have to help me list a little bit on this one, Matt. We've got Kenna, Bridge of Spirits, Sable, The Artful Escape, The Forgotten City, and Valheim. I haven't really played any of these games, so you're gonna have to help me. Matt, first of all, I think Kenna, Bridge of Spirits, probably the biggest high-profile game on here, and I think it's the game that'll probably win if I was to guess. But what do you think about this?
See, I think Kena definitely stands a chance. Sable, it seems there was like a lot of hype for it, and then it just kind of went nowhere. I know a lot of people really care about that game. I just don't know if it's going to win it. I haven't played The Artful Escape or The Forgotten City, but I hear a lot of incredible things about The Forgotten City, and it's actually on my short list to play before we get to Game of the Year discussions because of how highly it's being praised. For me personally, I think Valheim is going to take it, just because of how many people really, really care about that game, how it had like a generally strong launch for an early access game, a game that just kind of came into the scene. So I think Valheim has a really big community, and I think that's probably the one that's going to take it. My personal one, just because again I haven't played The Forgotten City yet, is still Kena. I really, really love that game. I think it's beautiful. It's a good length, and it does things really, really well. I just don't think that it's the top tier for this debut indie list, just because, like I said, combat wise and certain other things kind of don't live up to it being the best. So I think Valheim is going to take it, but my personal pick is Kena.
Nice. Next up, best indie. We're actually seeing some crossover here. We got 12 Minutes, Death's Door, Kena, Bridge of Spirits, Inscription, and Loop Hero. First of all, I'm actually really surprised that 12 Minutes actually made this list because of how divided people are on that game. Because either some people think it's like one of the greatest games ever made, and other people think it's like awful and they can't stand that game. So I'm actually curious to know how it ended up on this list. But of this list, again, I really haven't played that many of these, but I would say Kena is still one of the ones. It's probably like a three-way tie, probably between that, Death's Door, and Inscription for me as far as my line of thinking of who will win. So if I was to guess, it's probably going to be Death's Door of the three of them. I think that's the one that'll probably win out between the three of them. But I could see it going like either way between the three of those. So Matt, I'm curious to know what you think about this one.
I think Loop Hero also has some serious contention, just because I know, again, a lot of people really love that game, and there was so much hype around it that I actually picked it up and messed with it for a while. Now, granted, it's not exactly my type of game, but I understand why people like it. But I think what will and should win, even based on my limited experience with it, is Death's Door. I know a lot of people really, really love that game. And from what I played, the combat's really fun. The atmosphere in the game is fantastic. And while I think Kena also has a shot, I think it'll end up coming down to between Death's Door and Kena, with Death's Door ultimately taking it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's the category that I think could go like a number of different ways.
Yep.
I just, the only one of those that I think is probably not having a chance is probably 12 Minutes because of how divided it is. So
yeah, I think you're 100% right. Even though I actually really liked 12 Minutes, I understand people's problems with it, and I understand why people coming at it. But I think even though the story isn't handled the best way, I actually found the puzzles interesting. And like for me, as not a puzzle person and someone who doesn't usually spend much time on games like it, I actually really enjoyed it, and I felt smart playing it, which was what's a good feeling for me. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just too divided for it to actually stand a chance.
All right, next up, best ongoing game, and this is actually very similar to the community support one, so we'll breeze through it. Apex Legends, Call of Duty Warzone, Final Fantasy XIV, Fortnite, and Genshin Impact. For me, the game that I want to win and the game that I think will win is exactly the same for the exact same arguments as the Community Support Award, and that's Final Fantasy XIV. Every week that I log into that game, there's always something new to do. There's always new content coming around. All the events that happen every single year are like different each year. Like like each month, there's like a new event happening. Sometimes there's a collaboration with other games like Final Fantasy 15 and Dragon Quest X. We had those crossovers this year with that game, combined with the crossover we had with Monster Hunter when Monster Hunter Rise came out, with Rathalos, which is still one of my favorite bosses in the entire game, to just all of the ongoing content with that game. I think that's a shoo-in for me as probably the winner of this category. Genshin, I think, would have probably been my runner-up, but I know that, again, there's some contentious stuff with Genshin pretty recently as far as content is concerned. So that's why like it's probably like my 1B, I think, in this category. And Matt, do you feel any differently than I do on this one? What do you think?
No, completely agreed. I think you nailed it.
Cool. Next up, best performance. We got Erica Mori as Alex Chen in Life is Strange: True Colors, Giancarlo Esposito as Anton Castillo in Far Cry 6. We got Jason E. Riley as Colt in Deathloop, Maggie Robertson as Lamy Demistresu in Resident Evil Village, and I always butcher that last name. And then we got, and I'm going to try not to butcher this one as well, Ozumaya Akahia as
Ozioma Akaga. I actually looked this one up because I was Ozioma Akaga.
Thanks, Matt. As Juliana in Deathloop. So we got 2 Deathloop ones in here, Matt. So since I kind of went on my Final Fantasy 14 dialogue, what do you think about this one?
I think it's going to be my personal pick is Ozioma. I think she nailed it as Juliana. I thought she was constantly engaging. I loved listening to her banter with Colt. I think Jason E. Kelly also deserves it as Colt. These 2 were the strongest performances from the games that I played because I haven't actually played with the other 3. But I also I think Ozioma deserves it. I think she rocked it. I think she was so engaging the entire time. So I want her to win. I actually think that she deserves it, and I think there's a good chance that she will win. I think, like I said, Jason as Colt also there's a strong chance because I know people weren't too happy with Giancarlo Esposito as Anton Castillo in Far Cry 6. I know there's a lot of debate online as to how his performance actually was. Lady Dimitru also I think stands a chance just because of how much people loved her character leading up to and the release of Resident Evil. But Ozioma is my pick. Where are you at with this one?
Actually, when I look at the category, I try and separate Colt and Juliana's performances in Deathloop from each other. Mm-hmm. I almost feel like their performances in a way aren't as strong if taken in a vacuum, kind of on their own. Like I definitely think both actors put everything they had into the role, but I feel like those characters don't work without each other. So it would be weird to pick one over the other in a lot of ways. That's why like my pick for this category and a performance that actually drove me to tears was actually Erica Mori as Alex in Life is Strange: True Colors. Like I actually think she put on an incredible performance in that game, and she was before the Game Awards even started, even thinking about who I would want to maybe even be nominated for this category, she was actually like one of the ones I was thinking about all year. From the second that I played Life is Strange: True Colors till I rolled credits on it, like I thought that she might have been one of the front runners. So I actually think like my personal choice would be Erica. I think she did an incredible job as Alex, and I would love to see her win. But I don't actually think she's going to win. I actually do think it's a toss-up between the 2 Deathloop actors. And just to contradict you, Matt, I'll actually say it'll be Jason. I think he'll win. But, I mean, it could be either one of them. And Maggie, I think, actually did a great job in Resident Evil as well. She actually won at the Golden Joysticks for best performance as far as her character. But again, that's fan voted. So the votes are tabulated in a different way. So I definitely think like her performance is pretty memorable. So I definitely think that she has a chance. But you're right. You're probably right, Matt. It'll definitely be a toss-up probably between the 2 Deathloop characters. And I'm just to spite you, I'm just going to say Jason instead of Osamaya. But I think she totally deserved it too. I think like just hearing like how sarcastic she is, Juliana, and I really like that character. So it was really cool she did a great performance in that game. So I wouldn't be mad about seeing her win either. So There you go. All right. Best audio design. I don't know how much we're going to have to say about this one, but we'll still read through it anyways. Deathloop, Forza Horizon 5, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Resident Evil Village, and Returnal. For me personally, I love the way that the audio is actually designed in Returnal, as far as the way it's actually incorporated with the DualSense, as far as the noise of the rain, for example, combined with how you feel that rain in the DualSense controller, and just the whole audio experience of Returnal, I think probably puts it over the top for me as far as both who I think should win and who I think actually will win. The other strong contender I think in this category is Forza Horizon 5, because I mean it's a car game. I think all the car sounds are great, but I actually think it's just a really strong game as far as audio design. So that's probably my second pick. But Matt, what do you think about this category?
I actually agree with you 100%. I think it's going to be a toss-up between Returnal and Forza Horizon 5 just because, like, Forza sounds great. Everything about it sounds good. And Returnal, the guns and the way that you move and everything about the way that Returnal, like, sounds, even just, like, the reload, like, I still remember it exactly. So I think it's going to be a toss-up between these 2, but I think Forza is one that's going to end up taking it.
Yeah. Okay. Next up, best score or music, we've got Cyberpunk 2077, it's back, Matt. We also got Deathloop, Near Replicant version 1.22474487193, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and The Artful Escape. The only one on this list I haven't played is The Artful Escape, so I can't really comment on that, although I've heard good things about the music and score in that game. But honestly, Matt, the one that I think should win this award is Guardians of the Galaxy, because normally I wouldn't actually be like the type of person who'd be like, hey, I actually want a game with like a really killer licensed soundtrack to win. But the way the music is used in that game is actually where I think kind of puts it over the top. Plus, I actually think the score for that game on top of the licensed music is also really fantastic. It feels like it's just ripped straight out of the MCU, and just the way that game uses music is what I think kind of puts it over the top over the rest of these titles for me. My runner-up would be Near Replicant. The music in that game is incredible. But I think as far as what will win and should win, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy for me is that pick. But what do you think, Matt?
I agree with you. I think that Guardians both deserves it, and I want it to win. Just because, like you said, the way that they use it, like the first time that you mess up one of your team huddles and like Never Gonna Give You Up starts playing, like they're just they're so clever with it, and it's so much fun all the way through. And even me playing on streamer mode, like I missed out on a lot of the licensed music, but even the music that they made for the game that they had as the band, like Star-Lord, was fantastic and fun to listen to. So even outside of like the licensed music that they brought in, I even think that the music that they added on was just spectacular. And I think you're 100% right. It does sound MCU, and like the score that they have running sounds fantastic. I also want to give a shout out to Deathloop, because I think that's another one that might take it. The music in that game I think is also really, really fantastic, and the way that it swells and explodes, especially as you're like on the run back to the tunnels to try to get away from Juliana and stuff, I think it's really, really well put together. But I think Guardians should and will take it.
Yeah, Sam. All right, next up, best art direction. We've got Deathloop, Kena Bridge of Spirits, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and The Artful Escape. Again, still haven't played Artful Escape. For this category, I'm going to actually probably say that Ratchet both deserves it and will win it, because I feel like the visual design for that game kind of sets a new bar for what, visuals in a game really look like as far as current gen games are concerned. Like, I don't think there's a game that came out this year that I think has as strong of a visual showcase as a game like Ratchet and Clank did. So it looked like you were playing a Pixar game, for God's sake. Like, it looked incredible. So for me, I definitely think that Ratchet's the game that will win, that I hope wins. Otherwise, I think Psychonauts 2, I think, did a lot of great things visually, so it's another one that I can see winning. And then Deathloop, I kind of like the style of Deathloop and how it's kind of like a grindhouse film mixed with kind of like Arcane's kind of style, like kind of artistic style. So I think that was like a really good fusion of those two kind of styles coming together. It's almost like a Dishonored, but grindhouse film almost. So I like the look of Deathloop as well. But if I had to pick, it's probably Ratchet and Clank. But what do you think, Matt?
My pick is Ratchet as well. I think they both deserve it, and it will win. It's just the way that they blend environments together and how seamlessly you can kind of hop between areas, and the way that they use the portals, I think just all looks so visually interesting, and it's a lot of fun to kind of witness and play through. I think Kena deserves a shout out as well, just because of their cutscenes and the way that that world looks is also really, really beautifully put together. I could also see Psychonauts winning, though. I think ultimately it's going to be a toss-up between Psychonauts and Ratchet, and I hope and believe that Ratchet wins. Yeah, I think so, especially because, again, I don't know if it's going to win a lot of these later awards, so that I think that's where it's probably going to get most of its votes, is probably this category. All right, next up, we've got Best Narrative. We've got Deathloop, It Takes Two, Life is Strange: True Colors, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and Psychonauts 2. So this category is kind of is actually a big category. I think that there's a lot of incredible choices here. My pick as far as what I would want to win, if it was me personally, Ryan Turford, taking all my biases in, would actually be Life is Strange: True Colors. I love the story in that game, and it's one that I would love to see win. But that's not my pick. And my pick may actually surprise you, Matt, because this is one you probably wouldn't have assumed coming, because this is a game I didn't play until a week ago from the time we're recording this. But my pick for Best Narrative of what should win is Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. 110%. I love the way that all the characters are written in the game. I love just the heartfelt story that you have throughout that entire experience, and the way that narrative comes together. Like,
it's so strong in that game, and definitely a game that I was not expecting to have that strong of a narrative on. So I definitely think it's the game that deserves it, and I think it's the one that'll probably win. And again, like I think there's a sterling possibility that Psychonauts 2 or It Takes Two wins. I know, again, neither of us really were blown away by It Takes Two's story, but I know a lot of critics that are voting on this really like the story in that game. So that's why I think that it has a pretty good shot here. But again, there's any one of these I think could win it. But Matt, what do you think about this one?
I agree. My personal pick is Guardians of the Galaxy, just because, like you said, the way that the characters are written, that for me, they're pretty much now the definitive versions of those characters. Everything about how they interact and how their character arcs and the things that they overcome. But also for me, it's how it tackles grief and trauma in a very, very kind way. It handles it with a nuance that I wasn't expecting the game to do. And I wasn't expecting them to tackle those topics at all, but they do it in a very kind, in a very empathetic, and a very caring way. So I think it deserves it. I think Life is Strange True Colors, while I haven't played it, I do know a lot of people who really enjoyed the narrative. So I think Life is Strange also has a really strong possibility. Ultimately, I think Life is Strange will probably take it, but I want Guardians to win, and I would be really happy if it did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Like that's why, like again, if you was to bring all my personal fandoms in, I love the Life is Strange series, and just seeing how much they elevated the story this time around, like made me really want that game to win. So I'm really hoping that it wins. But yeah, I actually think that Guardians actually stands like a much better shot than I ever thought it would. So, and for all the things you mentioned as well. All right, we got 2 categories left. We got Best Game Direction, which in a lot of ways, in most previous years, I've usually seen either this always be taken by the Game of the Year nominee or the 1B of the Game of the Year nominees if in a close year. So in this year, it might actually matter more than in previous years. We got Deathloop, It Takes Two, Returnal, Psychonauts 2, and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. For this one, I actually want Psychonauts 2 to win it. I actually loved seeing the evolution of like kind of the smaller scale of that game when it was first announced to basically the infusion of cash from Microsoft, and just seeing how much more they could put into it as far as the game's direction is concerned. I actually think Tim Schafer and his team at Double Fine did an incredible job with that game. And it was a game that I was not nearly expecting it to be nearly as good as it ended up being. And it was a fantastic platformer from start to finish. So it's the game I want to win. But I think this one's going to be Deathloop. And I'm going to get into that more when we get into the Game of the Year category. But I think that Deathloop is the one that I think will win this award. Matt, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, for me, I think Returnal and Ratchet both need to be celebrated here just because of how incredible those games flow. While they're not perfect and maybe not the most groundbreaking, I do think they both deserve a chance here. I think Ratchet has a strong possibility, but similarly to you, Ryan, I think this will end up going to Deathloop, just because of how complex the narrative can be and how open they make things, and about like figuring out when you need to go where, and how all that really ultimately ties together and how many variations there are between the two. I think Deathloop, just in terms of how big it really is, even in its more confined space, I think it deserves it, and I think it will win it.
For sure. And then last award, the big award, Game of the Year. We got Deathloop, It Takes Two, Metroid Dread, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Resident Evil Village. So pretty solid list. I mean, in a year like this where all the games are so close, like this category could have been like 15 to 20 games long, I think, at this point. So Matt, I'm going to go to you first, actually. What do you think the Game of the Year is going to be this year, my friend?
I have a really hard time with this list, Ryan, because this really, more than I think any other category, is really going to come down to personal preference in a way that is just like, what kind of game do you like more than the other? I think Ratchet stands a very strong chance at taking this, just because of how fun that game is. That game nails just an atmosphere of just having a great time. It's probably the most fun I've had playing a game all year was in Ratchet. The visual presentation is fantastic. The story is solid. It's fun. It's more Ratchet. But I think that's the kind of big qualifier here is that ultimately it is just more Ratchet for better or for worse. If that is something that excites you, if that's something that you really love and care about, then I can easily see this being the winning it. I think Metroid Dread, though, stands a very, very strong possibility of taking this as well, just because, again, if you consider the whole story around it, with how long it's been since we've had a 2D Metroid, with how much that game succeeds, but also because recency bias is a thing and it was the one to come out closer to this the voting process. I think there is a really strong possibility that it takes it. I honestly can't decide if it's going to be Ratchet or Metroid, but I think it's going to be one of the two. With Psychonauts 2, I think also having a possibility, but I think with Metroid and Ratchet, I really think it's going to ultimately come down to being one of those two. Personally, I'd like to see Ratchet take it, but I wouldn't be surprised if Metroid does as well. Ryan, where are you at with this one?
So first off, I actually have to ask you before I go into this, what is the game that you personally, if you were to vote, Matt, if you had to pick, what's the game that you want to win out of all these? I'm making you pick one. I'm making you pick one game.
I know. If the one that I want to see win is honestly Deathloop.
Yeah.
And that's because I think, again, kind of coming back to me with a bit of the surprise factor with how much I really loved my time with Deathloop, with how interestingly and even just how well designed the multiplayer is and how much they're working to make it better, with how interesting and just how much fun I had putting all the puzzle pieces together, trying to figure out what's the best way to do this and then kind of refining it and working on it. I think, like I said, Ratchet's like my 1A on here just because, again, of just how much fun it was. But I think it's, for me, it's Deathloop out of this list. Mm-hmm. But I also feel like it depends on the day. Some days I might say Ratchet, I might say Deathloop. But Deathloop is the one that is my personal at the top for this list right now. Okay. What about you?
Fair enough. As for me, number one, you could already guess the game that I want to win. Mm-hmm. By a landslide, it's Metroid Dread because it's my favorite franchise of all time. I've said it before on our Metroid Dread review. It is the best game that I've personally played in the last 10 years. My favorite game I played in the last 10 years is Metroid Dread. So for me to not say that I want to win would be like kind of just the most anti-Ryan Topher thing I could ever say. So I will definitely say the game I want to win by a landslide is Metroid Dread and I think it honestly deserves it because I really love both I love, even though it didn't have the greatest narrative, it had great environmental storytelling. It had a really inventive world to explore and to kind of go around. I love kind of the puzzle solving aspects of the game and how it's not completely straightforward. Like you have to experiment a little bit as the player and they leave it up to the player. But the combat design in Metroid Dread in particular is what really blew me away with that game, with the way the boss design set up, with the freedom of movement that you have in that game, the way some of the more tense moments with some of the Emmys are kind of constructed that kind of blends like horror elements in with this really great Metroidvania experience. Like I loved that game to death. So that's a game that I really, 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 really want to win this award. But I actually think that it probably will actually win as well because I think that it might appeal more to some of the jurors than maybe some of these other titles, especially because, number one, it's the only one of these titles that's actually available on Nintendo Switch. None of these other games are actually on Switch. So I think that there's a lot of people voting on this that are primarily Switch players or people that are mostly into Switch. So I think that play is going to play at least a little bit of a part in this. I'm not saying that that's a reason why it should win by any means, but I definitely think it plays into if we're picking who we think will win by far. And I'm kind of in that headspace. But at the same time, I actually think that Resident Evil Village actually stands a better chance of winning than we're giving it credit for, because I know a lot of people on this jury that really, really, really like that game. So I actually think that there's a possibility that it comes down to those two games, Metroid Dread and Resident Evil Village. But I'm going to go with my gut. My gut's telling me that Metroid Dread is going to win, even though I also personally want that game to win a lot. But separating myself out of it, knowing everything I kind of know about kind of how these award shows are kind of voted on, I actually think Metroid Dread's probably going to win. So I'm going to lock it in. That's the one I'm going to pick, even though I'm going against the grain as well, because the Golden Joysticks, again, just to reference that a little bit, the only other big award show that we had at the time of this recording, there was a Critics' Choice Award that was actually voted on by critics at that award show, because even though it's mostly fan voted, there is one award for their game of the year that's voted on by critics, and actually Deathloop won that one. So they're actually they're more in the critics that voted on that are more in the camp that you are, Matt, with Deathloop. And I definitely think it has a strong chance of winning, but going back to what I was talking about with Best Direction, I actually think that that's maybe where Deathloop gets the nomination rather than this. So that's why I actually think Metroid Dread, against all odds, might actually come out with the win this year. Taking recency bias into consideration, the fact that it's the only Switch game, come out with the fact that people really like that game a lot, even non-Metroid fans. I think that's kind of my reasoning for it winning. But we'll see. I guess we'll find out this week, Matt, because the week that this comes out, of course, the Game Awards are actually happening on December 10th. So I know we'll be watching to kind of maybe check out the winners. But Matt, what do you think about this process overall? And we've gone through all the awards. How do you think about this year's list of Game Awards nominees?
I think it's so interesting because I don't think there is a clear definitive winner in any of these categories. I think there's really strong contenders. I think there's a lot of good reason to believe that a certain game or a specific game may win. But I also feel like we both were kind of like, this will probably win, but there is a chance for this. I feel like there's a lot of room in any of these categories, with Game of the Year being, I think, the biggest one, that it could really go any way. So I'm super, super curious to see how this shakes out, because I don't think we had like a Breath of the Wild this year. We didn't have a God of War. We didn't have one game that's just like, obviously it's going to be this. But we had a lot of really, really strong games that are ultimately going to be competing against each other. So I'm really curious how the votes are going to split. I'm really curious just to see which of these games are actually genuinely going to win, because I think there is a really strong possibility that almost any of them can. What about you, Ryan? Where are you at with this year's nominees?
Actually, I thought that we've got a pretty good list of nominees this year, as far as both the Game of the Year awards and just all of the awards in general. And you're right to your point. Like, this year kind of reminds me of 2016 in a lot of ways, which is the year that Overwatch actually won the Game of the Year award at the Game Awards, because it was actually a similar year to this one, where there were so many different games and there wasn't really like a standout game in particular that was the clear winner. Like Overwatch was an amazing game when it came out, but it was also up against a lot of different games as well that were also really good too. So it actually reminds me of that year where like it could go anyway as far as both the Game of the Year awards, but even a lot of the stuff we talked about, which is why like I wanted to make sure for a lot of the categories that I thought were going to be really close, I wanted to make sure to kind of give my like 1As and 1Bs, because I definitely think that they could go in like any different direction. I mean, who knows? With Game of the Year, they might, like, It Takes Two might win, even though we didn't even talk about it. Like, it's possible. So who knows with this one? I think it could go a bunch of different ways. And unfortunately, unlike some of the other award shows, we don't really find out like how the votes are tabulated. So we don't know how close they are. So they don't usually release like the Golden Joysticks, again, just to go back to that award show, since it's fan voted, they actually released, like when they did their Game of the Year, they're like, here are the 5 games in order based on your votes. And then they also talked about like how the Game of the Year, what actually won versus the second place game, only had won by like 0.8% of the votes. So it was like super, super close, like maybe down to like 20 or 30 votes at that point, which of course their Game of the Year was actually Resident Evil Village, which is why I actually had thought about that. The runner-up actually for the Golden Joysticks was hilarious. It was Mass Effect Legendary Edition was the runner-up, and then Metroid Dread was the third choice. So that's why like it's sort of interesting to kind of compare and contrast different award shows together. But yeah, so I'm curious to know like how the voting actually went down for this, because and how close it was, because honestly, to your point, like with the Game of the Year awards or pretty much most of the awards, except for like best fighting game or best sports and racing game, like I think those ones are the only real shoe-ins this year. Or the Final Fantasy 14 awards, like community support or ongoing games. I think those are like pretty close to shoe-ins for that as well. But for the most part, it could be anything, as I usually say over the Xbox Drive. But that's going to do it for our breakdown of the Game Awards. I hope we get some awesome reveals during the award show, and I'm just excited to watch the awards with everyone else. But Matt, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at burnout_Matt, or you can find us over on YouTube at youtube.com/burnoutbrighter. And with our mental health series should be going by the time that this goes live, so make sure you come check it out.
Very nice, my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Yumi Capri's, on YouTube at youtube.com/Yumi Capri, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Matt Sawinski, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been a very special episode 30 of the PlayStation Drive, and we're out. The PlayStation Drive is fueled by patrons over at patreon.com/Yumi Capri, and I want to say thank you to each and every one of our patrons from the bottom of my heart from your support across all of our content. And let's start by thanking our Premium producers, Dallas Ford, Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team, and Jonathan Brown over at youtube.com/PM Entertainment. Our Platinum producers, Robbie Ballaby Miller and Trucker Sloth, and our Gold members, Argo, Brendan Myers, Dallas Robbins, Emily O'Kelly, Heather Boney, James Johnson, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Benji Kong, Marcus O'Neill, RJ Kern, Dano, Skinny Matt, Mr. and Mrs. Nasty Boots, Fulia Fuji, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support.